That was me. Sorry, you're good.
Oh, okay. So Red Hat is known for Linux operating system. They were one of the original kind of open source companies. I've worked for them for a little over 15 years and been part of open source communities that whole time. We'll get into a little bit of that as we go through. The interesting thing is, right, so we were selling billions of dollars of free software, and we actually got bought by IBM in 2019, and we're still independent, but owned by them. It was one of the largest software acquisitions in history. It was $34 billion for a company that has no intellectual property, right? So somehow you can make money with free software. But this talk is really going to be more about open source software, why you guys might care about it, how to get involved, things that you might want to know about it, that type of thing. Let's see. So before I get started, obviously, I haven't talked to anybody in person as a presentation like this since before COVID. So I'm very happy to finally be able to get out and kind of talk. So if I'm not as smooth as maybe some other speakers, then just let me know. But and by the way, questions are always welcome. You can always just interrupt me. If somebody can kind of maybe keep an eye on it on the chat, if there's questions that pop in the chat as well, very happy to take those, right? So, so my first question is going to be, how many people are actually familiar with open source software? Are you even heard the term, that type of, okay. All right, so it just gives me a good baseline for where we're at. So
Almost. What frameworks have we used that are open source? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I actually have that open in one of my other tabs. I was going to use that as an example of some of the structure of an open source project, right? So first, let's go ahead and we'll define what open source is, and I promise it won't be this wordy or boring the whole way. But the real key here is there's three main points, right? So open source software is released under a license, and then the other big point is it's got to be public, so the source code itself has to be released publicly. And then the last part is, this isn't maybe official, but it should be, any capable user is able to participate and contribute. I've provided a couple of links. Trip over this thing. I provided a couple of links here. They're going to share out the slides. You guys can kind of click around some of these. These two sites are really good resources if you want to learn more about it, different ways it's used in different aspects, right? Let's see. Go on to the next slide. All right, so what are some really widely known open source projects? So pretty much every piece of software you use, whether it's your laptop, your phone, your car, whatever it might be, is using open source software. So it used to be, way back when, open source was kind of a niche thing, not many people used it, and now it's pretty much everything. If you dig down in like Apple CarPlay on the screen, you can get to where it'll tell you all the open source licenses that are being used, right? And here's some of the big examples, right? So who has an Android phone, right? That's an open source project for Google, but lots of other people in industry use it. The Firefox browser as well, WordPress, but then more to like what Max was saying, a lot of open source programming languages as well, Python, PHP, Node.js, which is server-side, JavaScript, React, things like that. Let's see. Kind of juggling between two screens to make sure I hit my different points. All right, so why should you guys care, right? So what can open source do for you, right? A lot of people participate in open source projects, honestly, because it's fun. I know that sounds really geeky, but it's the right class to sound that way. So as far as, like, I've created some mods for video games that I play, a lot of mods for video games, even like, what's the name of it? I can't remember. Anyway, there's a home automation projects. There's a ton of, like, if you've ever just searched around GitHub, the amount of open source projects there is just staggering. Pretty much anything you're into, right? You can find there. A lot of people also are part of an open source community because it's a community. They get to connect with kind of people with similar interests all over the world, which is great. It's also very useful for learning new skills. And also, the big one here is maybe the last one, to prove your skills, right? So, you can kind of explore and learn, participate in a project. That's a great thing on your resume. It's excellent to say, I contributed this, or I was part of that, that type of thing. I personally have hired people that with no other experience in open source projects, right? And so it is definitely a good thing to kind of have. A lot of people also use it to do their job, right? So I started out by integrating open source software, fixing bugs that annoy you, so you go fix it, right? That type of thing, as well as like creating new projects if you want to share it. All right. So what can you do for open source, right? So this is a collaborative arrangement, right? The great thing about open source is, well, I don't know if it is great, but it's not so obvious, is that it kind of goes both ways, or it should. It doesn't always, right? So, what can you do for open source? Honestly, you can just use the software. That's a lot like views on YouTube, right? Love it when you get your views on YouTube. Using it, there's download statistics, things like that. You can build the software. Sometimes you might want to build it locally to understand the code better. Collaborate with the community, join conversations, join projects, right? Become committers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And a really big one that's really near and dear to my heart is around diverse perspectives and then bringing new ideas, right? So one of the things that Red Hat and open source projects I've been part of is getting more ideas in, right? The more people that are involved, the more different groups, different countries. We've had people show up and say, hey, this doesn't work this way in Arabic. And we've had to change something. It's like, I didn't know that, right? Because of the way that the language is parsed or processed, right? So there's a lot of really, kind of interesting things you can do there. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, I usually don't have that problem at all. Okay. I better mute my, okay, you got it. I need to mute my, my laptop. So let's see. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my own open source journey, and it's really just to, as my voice is coming through somewhere.
Maybe your laptop speakers?
Maybe. I thought I muted mine. Weird. No, it says muted. That's all right. I'll ignore it. Yeah, let's see if that helps. Test. Yeah, it's all right. For some reason, it is coming through and I'm muted. No, it's okay. No problem at all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my open source journey. Everyone's is very different. That's going to be a theme throughout this, right? So anything I say, like, this is how this project works or that, it's as different as any community you can be a part of, right? Whether you're a friend group from high school or, people from work, different ways of engaging, different ways of being part of it, right? That type of thing. So, so a much younger me, way back in 2005, I worked for a company called NetScout, and we started using something called JBoss Application Server. That's an open source project that did enterprise Java beans, which is a very kind of not in vogue technology anymore, but it was very, very widely used at the time. I was part of a group that was integrating it and getting it to work within our company. And I started making a few contributions because there was something that bugged me. I don't remember exactly what. And that kind of got the fire kicked off for open source. I really enjoyed that, kind of having an impact there. So as fates would be, Red Hat literally built an office next door. And I jumped over and joined Red Hat in 2007. The joke at the time was I literally didn't even change my parking spot. I just walked in a different direction, right? So I became the project lead of another open source project called JBoss Seam, which is related to the EJB ecosystem. From that, this is where it kind of some things start to change. I jumped over to engineering. I became a project lead, and I joined what's called an expert group. And that's part of governance. So it's part of how projects and vendors and different companies choose to do things. Why does your USB work? Your USB works because a whole bunch of people in the industry said, this is how we're going to make it work. And there's open specifications, and experts that aren't even part of a vendor can be part of that, right? So I joined the Java Server Faces expert group to try to help influence how some of the specifications around that aspect of the EJB ecosystem worked. Jump forward a few years, and I started getting involved in mobile. I became a Red Hat mobile architect, and I created a new open source project called AeroGear. Go through all this, trademark stuff. There's another company called AeroGear that makes airplane landing gear. So we had to make sure we didn't compete or conflict with them, that type of thing. But the point being, I got to create a new project, and I really liked it. Hired a team around it, and we had a good time getting that going and things like that. We've kind of moved in some different directions since then. And at some point I joined the dark side, and I joke about that. I became a manager and kind of moved a little bit away from the code. And I still like to stay technical, but I'm definitely not kind of a day-to-day programmer. But what that did do is it let me get involved with a lot of different projects and a lot of different open source communities, right? And that's everything from Node.js. So I actually led the Node.js group that has some of the top people in that project, as well as Knative and some of these Apache Tomcat, if you've heard of that. Some of the project leads for that reported to me as well. And I would kind of had different roles, right? Sometimes just the manager, but I also was an advisor for communities when there were questions and things like that, in some ways. Yeah, sure.
As far as like the languages that were used on these projects, is there any consistency, or did those kind of change as the project changed?
Yeah, sure.
Last one, the Java games one, I'm guessing that was based in Java.
Yep, exactly. So the question was, is there any consistent language across all of these, and how did that change, or that type of thing? I think roughly. It completely depends on the individual project. Some projects might have multiple languages. Some like the Rich Faces one was definitely Java based, but it also had a lot of HTML and JavaScript because it kind of spanned into the UI. But a lot of these, like this is Go, this is Java, this is Node.js, which is server-side JavaScript, but it's actually written mostly in C, right? Or C++. Michael Dawson would be hitting me right now. So yeah, so it really just depends. But a good question. And it is a consideration we'll talk about a little later when we talk about how to pick a project, right? And what are you trying to do? If you don't have no idea about a language, right? Unless you want to learn that language, you might want to pick a different project to get involved in, right? That type of thing. Okay, there you go. Thank you. I was right. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. All right, so that's just quick on my journey, right? Like I said, there's a lot of different ways of getting involved, and they can be very different. So let's talk about kind of the basic parts. And I know we're running a little behind, so I'll try to speed up since we started a little late. So let's talk about the basic parts of an open source project, right? So early on, we kind of defined it, right? And at a bare minimum, it has to be publicly hosted source code and an open source license. That's it. That's all you need. And sometimes that's all you're going to get. Sometimes if you just if I just created something and put it up on GitHub, I don't need anything else, right? Sometimes companies do that, and it's kind of like they say it's open source, but they don't build a community. They're not looking for people to get involved, right? So they can just kind of host it and say, see, we're open source, right? That type of thing. But really, a healthy open source project is going to have a few more things. It's going to have things around details around governance. How does the project work? We'll get into the details there. Community, and how to contribute. Again, I'm not going to dig into it right now. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what I do want to do is bring up React.js GitHub, because as Max was saying, right? React is an open source project. So if you look, this is, I don't know, have you guys explored the GitHub for React or just kind of downloaded it and used it? Okay, all right. So yeah, so this is the open source project for React.js, right? So as a new person looking at it, right, you can see here's like your open issues, pull requests. You know, obviously React is a very popular framework, right? So it has lots of open pull requests. And there's a few things, we'll dig into like the code of conduct and the contribution guide and things like that. If you want to get involved, you start to look at that, right? These are the contributors. Look at, there's almost 1,700 contributors for React.js. And Max is one of them right here, right? So, yeah. Great question. Great question. So a contributor, it's not necessary. It's not just answering questions on a forum. So a contributor doesn't mean you're a committer either, right? So a contributor is, I fixed a bug, and you guys go over pull requests and the workflow for pull requests and all that yet? Yeah, so like there's a GitHub pull request workflow and things like that. And I talk about GitHub a lot. It's the primary one. There are others. The Apache Software Foundation is another really good source of open source projects. There's others as well, but GitHub is kind of the de facto. So as a contributor, let's see if we can find Max. Where is it? Usually there's a list of contributors. Oh, no, they don't. Doesn't look like they have it. They probably have it somewhere. Like so I'm not gonna dig through it now and kind of take time. But it's usually, I put in a PR. The PR has been reviewed and merged. That's enough to be a contributor. There's also, like I said, there's also committer, which is I have the right to review PRs and put them into the source code. Right? There's a couple of levels, but great, another really great question.
So just to give an example, we work with a text editor that is in React, and it's on Facebook site. Right? Whenever you go and you like write a new comment to tag someone, they have a special text editor that they built for that. Well, there was some bug where when you copy and paste it, it would copy and paste extra periods in, but only in Safari and only on these certain computers. And so I forked the software, right? Which means I make a copy of React. I went in and I fixed the problem in the text editor, and then I opened a pull request. Someone at Facebook itself reviewed my code, but with open source, they may not be at Facebook, just someone who is a maintainer of the repository. They reviewed that and said, oh yeah, this is a bug, I tested it, I followed the contribution guide, which is them saying, hey, when you do a pull request, when you ask us to pull this code back in, please follow this format to make it easy for us to test and make sure that everything is up to speed. And so I did that. They hit the merge button, and now not only did I contribute to the React project, I can now say that I have code that's literally running on Facebook.com, which is a really cool thing to be able to do. Obviously, that was a very little minor contribution of like, oh, if you're on this browser, don't post 2 periods. But that was a contribution I made open source.
Yep. Yep. That's an excellent example as well, right? Where kind of the impact there. And I'll get into a little bit on the contributor guide as well in just a little bit. So let's talk about one of the key tenets, licensing. And it's one of those things, if you're a lawyer, you love it, but licensing though is a very critical part of an open source project. And I think Max kind of highlighted a good reason. His code is running on Facebook.com. If he wanted, can he sue Facebook for using his code? Right? The answer is, if there was no license, yes, he could. He wrote it, they're using it. The license, however, is what defines how that code can be used, that you are giving it into that project, right? All of the guidelines there, right? And so anyway, back to the licensing side of things. I really like this phrase. So intellectual property plus open source principles is open source licensing. I think this is Torvalds, he created Linux, I believe. He's one of them, I don't remember exactly. So opensource.com defines an open source license this way. There's lots and lots and lots of licenses, open source licenses out there. not all of them are actually open source by this definition, right? So some might be specific to a product or to other thing. The great thing is there's these sources like opensource.com or .org that say, here are the good licenses. Just if you stick with those, like if you follow GitHub's own guidelines, right? If you want to create a new project, they'll have a template. And one of the things is, what license do you want to use? And it has a little like, why would you use it? And it's picking default standard ones because that should cover in most situations, right? There's a lot of links here if you really want to dig into the licensing.
A quick note on why licensing is so important. React, about 2 or 3 years ago, fully owned by Facebook, and Wikipedia came out and said, we really want to rebuild our entire website in React, but we can't due to your licensing.
Mhm.
And there was a big blowback on that, and Facebook had to change the licensing of the React framework because the way their license was written basically said that if Facebook wanted to pull the plug on React, they could pull the plug on Wikipedia itself.
Yep, and that's another great example. And Red Hat and IBM and pretty much every major vendor has whole teams of lawyers that look at these things because what is it? Oracle sued Google for using Java in Android, and it was like some ridiculously large suit. I don't remember the exact details, and it was all to do with the licensing that was in place. And why they could, right? And so this kind of gets into that a little bit. So licensing is so critical because how are contributions handled when Max or anyone else contributes, but also what business models does it allow out of that, right? So can I take React, create an awesome website and sell things on it, right? Is that part of some licenses you can't, if React was under a different license. Other licenses that we'll get to in a second are like GPL. If you use something that has a GPL license, you have to distribute the source code with whatever in GPL of whatever you make. So it's like I forgot what they call it, not infectious. It's there's a term for it where it basically can infect a code base if something in there gets a GPL license into it. So like we have to do big reviews when we're integrating open source because we need to make sure, right? So that has to do the redistribution. What was that? Yes. Oh yeah. It's well, some people are going to say it's great. All software should be free to everybody, right? But it's open source. There's the other open source licenses kind of say anyone can use it, but you don't have to make it open. Like, Samsung's version of Android, I don't know if it's open source, but it doesn't have to be open source, right? Android has their own version of Android that they tweak and modify and stuff like that.
The entire Mac operating system built on top of open source.
Yeah.
Not open source.
Right. That's a great example. And the last one, considering everything we talked about, this last one's kind of funny. Licensing should be easy because you don't want to lose contributors over it. What I would say there, kind of qualify that statement, is it needs to be consistent, right? Like if you're using a standard license, I get what it is and I'm good with it. But if it's some custom Facebook, they had some custom BSD version of a license, I forgot exactly. So this license here, right? So this is the spectrum, right? So here's like, it's called copy left. So strong copy left, GPL, HEPL, right? So what happens here is exactly what I was saying as far as the infected source files, where it can, if you use something that is GPL based in your project, you have to release that project under GPL, right, ad infinitum. Like it can kind of spread out from there. All the way to, these are the main ones you're going to see. Like, so if you go up, I don't know what React is. I'd have to look quick. Is it BSD, MIT, Apache? Those are the big ones that I'm more familiar with. And then there's this whole thing in between, right? All right, let's see what React is, because now I'm curious.
They moved to MIT.
Did they move to MIT? Okay.
They had BSD plus patents before.
All right.
One question about, so when you said like with the GPL licenses, how it has to be released, publicly if it's part of their software. Who holds those people accountable? Like, who says, like, if someone has a DB license and doesn't,
Sure.
disseminate it the way that they should, like, how are they?
Right. So the question is, just in case they can't hear online, how's that enforced? The truth is it's enforced by other companies, but there's also like the Free Software Foundation. And it's linked on a few of these other things. A few of the websites I have, there are companies that specialize in defending open source licensing, and kind of like a class action lawsuit, they'll get a cut.
Software ACLU or something.
Something like that, right? Like there's some approach there, right? So,
I explain that.
yeah, I think the Mac OS one is probably a really good example, right? So Mac OS is written on top of Linux and Unix, but Apple doesn't release the source code for Mac OS, right? Like, and because of the licenses, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to. A lot of companies, my last company, we shipped proprietary software. We used a lot of open source software, right? We didn't have to, and it basically lets companies exist, right? Red Hat made a commitment where everything we release is open source, right? So you can go up, there's a FTP site and you can download the entire source code for our enterprise Linux, right? That people pay millions and millions of dollars for. But if you want support, if you want it built, if you want it tested and configured, they pay for the subscription value is what I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch because it's really what I'm not trying to go for, but like companies do make money on open source and still be open source. And that's that. Yeah. Subscriptions and like when a security patch comes out and it needs to get distributed quickly and things like that, right? Otherwise it has to go through this other process. And those are really good too. Open source is it used to be that people would say, oh, it's open source, it's not secure. That was Microsoft's big thing. Microsoft gave up on that eventually because open source was fixing all the bugs quicker than they were, right? So,
to their sense, they bought GitHub.
right. So Microsoft owns GitHub. So, all right, let's move on. We'll talk quickly about governance. We're probably running over quite a bit. So what is governance and why is it different from licensing? I really like this one as well. So license is a legal framework. Governance is a social framework, right? So it can also be legal when we get to other things, but the license is like, here's the legal requirements. The governance is how are you going to work within this project? I want to join, I want to make a decision. We need to do something different. How is it done? Right. And there's lots of different types of governance. I won't get into all of that right now. But an important thing to note, and a term you'll hear, is around foundations, right? So, and these foundations are technically not-for-profit charitable organizations that support open source software. I think this one is one of the ones that's actually a legal, like they do a lot of defending of open source software, like patents and stuff. The Linux Foundation is a really big one. Red Hat is a big member of that. Cloud Native, this is what Kubernetes is in. So Kubernetes is part of this. The Apache Software Foundation, Mozilla, stuff like that. So foundations are how vendors get together and say, we're going to work in a certain way, so for the benefit of all of us, right? So like I was saying with USB, I don't know the exact USB or even JavaScript, right? ECMA script, right? There's an open specification. Vendors are involved, experts are involved. That's what this sets up, right? You don't really need to get involved in this unless you really, really want to. And all of a sudden you're kind of governance and down in the details, right? All right, we'll jump down to communities. How much time do I have? Just so I don't want to take too, I know we started 10-ish. Okay. All right. So community anatomy, real quickly, right? So everyone's different. It's like a fingerprint. right? So don't count this as gospel, right? But a strong community is going to have a website, a repository, issue tracking, mailing list, some sort of chat, and a process for working with them, right? And then what are the different roles in a community, right? So there's lots of different ones. There's a contributor. I just put a patch in and it got accepted. I'm now a contributor. There's maintainers who might be module leads or committers, things like that. A lot of big communities, and like Red Hat has some like community managers, and they're usually from either a group of community members that come together to kind of manage the community. Really big communities are like any other big community. You get jerks and you get good people and you get fights and you get disagreements and things like that. And then like advisory committees, governing boards, all those types of things. All right, contributing and code of conduct, right? So now we'll get into this. So you know Git, so it's got to be easy to contribute, right? It's got to, you know, it's like driving. If I know how to drive, I can drive anywhere in the world. No, right? Do they drive on the right side of the road or the left side of the road, right? Roundabouts, right? Whatever it might be, right? Just because you can drive doesn't mean you can work in any repository. However, really good open source communities will have a contributing guide, right? React does. So if you want to be involved in React, right? This one happens to be for Node.js, right? It's going to do things like, how do you build the thing? How do you report bugs? How do you create issues? I have an issue. What's expected of me? Submitting PRs, that whole process. A lot of them will have, if it's here, good bugs to start with. That's a really important one that we'll talk about quickly in a minute. But if you want to get involved in an open source project, a lot of them will have good first bugs. And it's basically a good bug to go dig in a little bit, because it should be relatively straightforward, but it'll give you a good understanding, right? That type of thing. And then the next one is the code of conduct. And this is another really important one in my opinion, because I've been involved with lots of communities and some of them can be toxic and some of them can be awesome, right? And it really depends. And a code of conduct comes into play and says, this is how we treat each other. We don't discriminate. We don't do this. This is how we expect people to be. You know, you don't have to be, you know, not everything has to be amazingly nice all the time, right? You can have arguments, but do it respectfully, right? That type of thing. So much so that there's actually a contributorgovernance.org. There's an entire website. There's multiple of them actually that talk about the code of conducts and things like that. Again, it's kind of like a template, but different sites tweak it in different ways, right? So it's definitely something to look for. So let's talk about engagement, right? So how do you engage in an open source project? What do you want to consider? Right, that type of thing. First of all, there's a lot of different ways to engage in an open source project, right? I'm not going to go through all these. We kind of touched on these in different ways, right? So lots of different ways to engage. And then now let's say, how do I pick a project? How do I know what to look for? The big question you're going to have to answer for yourself is, why do you want to, right? Is there something fun? Is there a video game you're interested in? Like, I have an airplane tracking thing at my house that I bought an antenna and a Raspberry Pi, and I posted up on their open source forums. And I was like, I can't get this to work. This Wi-Fi setting won't work, right? Or whatever it is. So, you know, is it learning a skill? So is it JavaScript? You want to learn? I want to learn more about Node.js, server-side JavaScript, or whatever it might be, that type of thing. Next thing to ask yourself, I think, is, I can't remember exactly who it was, about what programming language, right? What's the stack that's used? How mature is the project, right? And that goes both ways, right? Is it a project that's been around for 20 years and is so stable and it has this core group of contributors, right? Or is it so new that it's like Bob and Sheila created a project and, you know, they're just getting started. There's a whole spectrum. You want to look for something kind of in the middle. How many contributors are there already, right? How mature? You're looking for a kind of a sweet spot. Is it part of foundation? Not really as important. but then new and existing community. So this, you can kind of do a little investigation. How active is the project on GitHub? Does it have a lot of issues go through, the PRs, right? Because if you get involved, what you don't want to do is go through all this work, get a PR. You're like, I'm so proud of this PR, and no one looks at it ever. And you ping it in a month and no one looks at it. And then someone says, yeah, this is great, we're never going to get to it. Right? Like that's no good, right? And that happens, right? Because the people that are working as part of open source projects, it's on their own time as well, right? Or the company's paying them to work on it and they can't work on everything, right? So yeah, so there's that. And a lot of things, the culture is everything, right? What does it feel like when you hey, I'm new here? Do you get crapped on, or is there interest? And hey, how can I help you? Here's a link, right? That type of thing. All right, next one. Might seem obvious, but read the contributor guide. Nothing will annoy a community more than you showing up and like send a PR and it has nothing to do with the contributor guide whatsoever, right? It's like, that's an immediate, like, just someone will just post a link to the contributor guide, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to make a good first impression like anybody, right? In any new community, right? But also, if you have a question, ask it. And you can also kind of tell how do people react when you ask a question, smart or otherwise, right? So next thing, I was going to do this kind of as a brainstorming thing with the group, but we're not going to really have time. Kind of a start small, all right? So I'd recommend starting with things like documentation, or if there's a bug about a test case is failing, or if there's bugs that say great first item, that type of thing. Really just getting in and kind of understand, I'm just build it. Oftentimes it's just a pain in the butt to build some of these things. So if you can't get it built and you're following the build guide, a great question is, I followed the build guide, I can't get it to build, here's my system, what should I do? Right, that's a good approach, right? Oh, JavaScript, never mind. But yes.
Like compiling your code, if we
Yes.
our computer to run it, it's an intermediary step for the computer to rewrite it into code that the computer can actually use.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that's a really good point. And then, yeah, if it can take time to become like a committer, right? Different groups, different projects will have different expectations for committers. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes you got to get votes from different groups, right? That type of thing. So any questions on kind of the starting small thing? No, okay. So the last one before questions is really, and I've said this before, but it's really a common thing with any community, right? Go in and be curious, but be respectful, right? And you'll oftentimes get positive results. If someone's created an open source project, chances are they're not doing it because they want to be a jerk to new people, right? So hopefully you don't run into that. I won't say it won't ever happen. It does, right? Some groups, some projects really aren't interested in having a ton of new people, but the good ones are. So, keep a lookout for that. All right, Q&A. So any questions from Zoom? Any questions from the room? Yeah, sure. Nope. No, I mean, if I start an open source project and no one uses it and I don't care, I don't care. It can just stay on GitHub forever, right? Like, so it really depends what your goal in the project is, right? So I can put a video up on YouTube and no one might care about it and it'll just stay on YouTube. So it's very similar to that. But it was a good question. All right. Any questions in chat? Otherwise we can break. I'm been joining the Open Hack Nights quite a bit. There's another one this weekend or this Thursday. I should be there. And so if anyone has any questions or anything like that, want to talk more about how this crazy open source stuff works, I'd be happy to talk to them more there.
What? Yep, yeah, I was at the last one. Yeah, I actually go to the common space usually on the open hack days to
Unfortunately, we won't be able to make it, because we have a different guest, coming in on class on Thursday, but we will be at the next one.
all right.
They're on today's outline and.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, all week.
Oh, wow. Excellent. Excellent. And then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or, you know, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Quick question, man.
Yeah, of course.
Like without giving away any proprietary anything you can't share, can you kind of give a quick rundown of how your company monetizes source?
Yeah. So the question is, how does a company like Red Hat actually make money? So we do it in a couple ways, right? So one is services. So we have a consulting group, and that consulting group will go out and help put things together for the customer, right? But the main way we make money is through our products. So we take an open source project like Keycloak. We have a product called Red Hat SSO. It's actually renamed now, but let's just call it Red Hat Single Sign-On, right? Keycloak is the community project for that. It gets, as part of the productization process, we take that open source project, we completely build it internally. We don't add any extra code. If we add extra code, Red Hat, we have to put it public, right? That's part of our charter. But then we put it through testing, through lots of different environments, databases, systems, stuff like that. And then we package it in a consumable way, and we sell a subscription to that packaged thing. That packaged thing isn't open source. It's not that there's proprietary code in it. It's just, it was built and packaged, and, you know, it makes it easy to consume. A lot of open source projects can be tricky to consume. Kubernetes, you know, others, right?
So they're paying for, like, you know, your expertise and the work that you guys kind of work to make it more usable or more user friendly. Or
User friendly is a good way to put it. But also, people want someone to call at 2 a.m., right? When it breaks, right? And so our support services are excellent. And if it breaks, I've been on calls in the middle, you know, in the middle of the night, right? So we sell support as part of that as well. And we have a lot of experts that are part of it. So one of the things I tell new employees, right? You can go onto the mailing list where everyone on the company is. And if you have a really strong opinion about JavaScript, that's great. But the project lead for Node.js is on that list, and he might disagree with you, right? Like I work with some really great people at Red Hat, and I really, really value kind of those relationships and thing. Actually, one of the lawyers I work with at Red Hat is was a big part of the LGPL license, right? Like he actually created that, was part of the creation of that, right? So it's just kind of neat. But yeah, so that's how they monetize that. And yeah. All right. Anything else? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mhm. No, so there's a couple ways, right? So one is pick whatever. I know you guys are looking into JavaScript and React and things, and there's a huge market around that, right? So what you might want to do is you might not want to contribute to React itself, because that doesn't necessarily give you a lot of React experience of using it. That's developing the software, the framework. But there's a lot of projects that use React, right? And so you can find some of those. Maybe there's one that's very interesting to you for whatever reason it might be, right? And you can get involved with that, and it'll show your expertise. So you can put it on your resume, and people can go to your GitHub account. They can see, you know, your learning and your progress and stuff like that. Like I said, I've hired people from open source projects because they hadn't graduated college yet, but they clearly knew what they were already helping us on the project on AeroGear, right? And I called him because he was friends with one of my other employees, and I said, hey, do you want to do this full time? It's like, but I haven't graduated yet. It's like, I don't care, right? Like, so there's a lot of opportunity there. And yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
Any other questions?
No, happy to take them offline as well. I think Max I'll give you my contact. I mean, you have my contact, but is everyone in Slack as well?
In the Syracuse IO Slack?
Yeah. And then OpenHack and LinkedIn under my name.
Oh, so
I think you're on the mentors page of careers and code.
Oh, I
think mentors, I think they have links in there. So like
oh, really? I didn't even know I was on that.
I believe it's careers and code.
and if you're not up there, we'll get you out there where
Yeah.
the paper site.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and thanks everybody online, and we can take this offline. And I'm going to use this as an example of why I need to carry a giant bag of cords everywhere, even on vacation.
Never hurts.
Thank you, Jay.
All right, I'm going to leave the meeting.
That's fine.
Excellent.
I just posted a link to the Syracuse IO Slack in our live stream channel.
Excellent.
One with that power adapter.
Yeah, this is a gaming laptop, so the power adapter is a little ridiculous. It's a defensive weapon, in fact. So what else are you going to be talking about? Am I hanging out?
If you would like to, you're more than welcome to. I will bother you, Mike.
Oh, yes, of course.
Thank you.
You don't want to be listening to me for the rest.
Hear you on your drive back and what podcast you're listening to. No, we don't have that quite a range on these mics. So we are in the middle of React. We spend 3 weeks on React and we're just starting our 3rd week. We made a blog project using vanilla JavaScript and local storage. And so tonight we are working on converting that over into React. So let's kick it off with our stand-up. What did we learn last week? What did we build? What concepts did we struggle with? What concepts did we conquer? Use effect. What did we use effect for?
Page loads.
Yes. So tonight we will also be using use effect, but we will learn why we need use effect and figure out how our code runs differently in a use effect than it does in just putting it directly into the component itself. What else did we learn last week? What did we build? Yes, we started setting up routing. What did we have to do to use routing? React router. And how did we install that? Yes. Most packages on NPM, if not all of them, are open source. So React Router is a great example of an open source project that is maintained by a community that we can use. God, there are like 40 different monitors on my computer right now.
I'm gonna say this one is. Nope. Let's make that one back to built-in. And put this one on mirror for built-in. That's what I wanted. Okay, move this over here. This up here. Share my screen. Okay, so where we're headed tonight is we are going to revisit the blog project. Fortunately, we already have all of our code set up from Thursday's class. So we're going to start off there. We're going to revisit our vanilla JavaScript code, make sure that we understand that. And then we are going to dive back into the routing and building out our homepage with the use effect and local storage. Before we do that, how are we feeling about the weekend homework? Did anyone attempt it? Did anyone get stuck anywhere? Yeah.
During the weekend, I was able to work the API. I was able to probably improve most of the things, especially for the item and the weather itself, but the day is not in the work itself, so it has to be worked around the impact work. So it takes a lot of different options to actually make it work.
Yeah, so basically what happened is when we got our data back, you know what, let me dive into that. So I'm going to fire up my VS Code. I'm going to see what I have open, which appears to be weather, which is convenient. I'm going to go into my file. Nope, wrong weather. File, open folder. There's certainly past week too. Appears to be my latest weather. So I'm going to pop in my terminal and run an npm start. And this is where we left off, right? And the link that I gave you guys in Canvas said that at the open weather map, we were going to use their 5-day, 3-hour forecast because it's free. So we see our API call is here and we're like, all right, great. We've already got some code set up in our use effect to not only geolocate our location, but also to get the current weather. So it makes sense that we would add in one more API call, right, in order to get all the forecast data. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, okay, make another API call using Open Weather Map Daily Forecast API. Even have the comments written already. So I'm going to say const forecast data response. It's going to await, right? Because we've got async code, a fetch. And I'm going to go back to my documentation and grab this URL. And something that Brian noticed was HTTPS is what we want to do. Basically, without this S, the browser isn't going to use the secure method. Because of that, the browser gets a little weird with security things and goes, oh, you're requesting insecure data on a potentially secure website. That could be tricky for a user, right? So we add in this HTTPS, and then we've got to use the lat, which we already have defined. So we're going to make that a template literal. And we also have the longitude, which we have defined. And then our API key, I'm going to grab from our previous call. And from here, commented already out. We already planned ahead for this, right? Parse the JSON. Good call. Add in the imperial. All right, now we got to parse it out. So we're going to say forecast. Let me make sure I didn't. Yeah, forecast JSON is equal to await a forecast data response, and we're going to parse that out. Parse that out as JSON. and then console log the data to see the structure of the data, with structure spelled probably quite wrong. So we're going to console log out our forecast JSON. So I'm going to hop back over to my browser. I'm going to go to my React app. Nothing changes here yet because we just console logged it out. So here is, I'm going to make sure my line number lines up with 43. It does. I pop open this object and I'm like, okay, looks like my city information is coming in. That's cool. But I've got a list here of 40 different items in it. Okay, well, I wanted 5. It's a 5-day forecast. So I pop open my list and I'm in here and I'm like, okay, let's look at what one of these is. Okay, the 10th, today's the 9th. So that's tomorrow's date. That's cool. And I've got my temperature in here. And we even have in our weather object that it's cloudy. And I'm like, okay, we could start working on that. Let me go make sure that my next one here is where I expect it to be. So I pop that one open, and now I've got the 10th at 3 a.m. Well, what was this one? This was the 10th at 00. Okay, well, let's go back to the documentation because now I'm confused. I thought I was getting a 5-day forecast out of this, right? So I go back to my 5-day forecast, and this 3 hour is trying to tell us, hey, on every day, we're going to give you a forecast every 3 hours. Because if we think about it, our weather at midnight is going to be very different than our weather at 10 a.m., which is going to be very different than our weather at 10 p.m. So we kind of get in this situation where not only do we have the data, but the data, we've got to start pulling through it. This isn't just a matter of pulling apart the object to get out the information that we want. We've got to be selective about what information we're pulling out from this array. Well, the first day isn't too bad because it's 0 indexed, right? We can say, hey, tomorrow's weather is the 10th. We're good to go. Let's focus on getting just that day working, and then we can go in and get the other days working. So I'm going to go back up here, and we already have a structure for our data. Well, why do we need to stick with this structure? Because down in our return, we're passing in the day of the forecast with 3 props here. And based off of those props, we use those props in our component. So we need to make sure that whatever we've got coming out of our forecast day here lines up with the data that we've already structured in the state. So I'm going to copy this whole thing and use the set forecast data. So I'm going to come down here, right where I've got access to my data. I'm going to say, hey, I would like to set my forecast data to a new array with all of that information in it. And from here, I can start pulling some information out. So if I go back, my forecast data is here. I'm going into the list. I'm using the 0 index, and then I need to pull out the main temp. Okay, that's a lot that even I can't keep in my head. So I'm going to try and split my screen here so I can do that. So I'm going to say, all right, don't worry about the day. I just want to get the temperature out. So I'm going into the object of forecast JSON. I'm going to access the list key to get access to the value of the array. I said I'm going to use the 0 index because that's the first day I want the weather information from. Then I'm going to go into the main, and get out the temp. So I'm going to save that. And when we come over here, I've got my 33.8. Okay, well, that's cool. Next up, I want to use the weather. And so I have access to the icon information that I'm looking for. So I'm going to say, all right, where is that nested all the way down? That's still in our forecast JSON. Then we are going into the list still. We're still using the 0 index, but now instead of going into main, I want to go into the weather. So I'm going to say dot weather, and that is an array. Well, that's kind of dumb that it's an array because there's only one item in the array, but nonetheless, we have to work within those data constraints. So we're going to use our bracket 0, and then we get access to our icon. So I save that and I get this lovely O4N. Okay, well, that makes sense. We've seen this O4N before, right? Because when we go down and look at how we deal with our icon here, this URL came from the documentation. So we can actually borrow this whole image tag, go down to our component, and instead of using the icon, which we had as an emoji before, we are now going to drop in the image tag where the icon, which we set right here, is going to be used in the URL down here. And now we get our first icon showing up. Granted, that broke all of our other icons. Why? They're all looking now based off of the first time we structured the data. But now that we've got the data coming in from the API, down here, that is using the string. That's using the icon code. So we've got to convert the icon code into the URL that we're going to use for the image. Okay, based off of this, we can probably extract out the other information. If we're getting data forecasts every 3 hours, that means that how many data points are we going to have for a day? 8, right? We take our 3, we do 24 divided by 3, we get 8. That means that if I come down here and reuse this, I can look at the 8th index, and I'm actually going to get the weather for Friday. Okay, and if we continue all of that down, we could say, hey, let's get the 16th day, and we'll get that information. Okay, that's great and all, but what problem did we not tackle here? The day. This is hard-coded to Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This weather isn't actually representing the weather on Thursday. This is representing the weather on Tuesday. How do we know that? Because if we look at this DT text, it says the 10th. The 10th is tomorrow's date. Okay, well, there's this DT and its numbers, and there's DT text, but there should be some way to tell JavaScript, hey, this is a date. Once you have that date, get the day outside of it. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, hey, my Thursday, I'm going to convert the forecast JSON dot list dot 0 index dot dt txt. And if I save that, I should get an error that says objects are not a valid child. If I come back over here and I look, this new date is a date object, right? That's what JSON is converting it to. But date doesn't know how to show up in React. React's like, what do you want of that date? Do you want the year? How do you want it formatted? All of that kind of stuff. So what we can do is we can use a function called getDay. We come back over here and I get 2. Like 2, what are you talking about? What happens if I take this whole thing and I paste it in here with the 8 index? Now I get 3. I'm like, what? All right, we got to look this up. So I'm going to say JavaScript date get day. And we're going to go to one of the biggest open source companies, Mozilla. And we look at here and it says get day returns the day of the week for the specified date according to local time, where 0 represents Sunday. Okay, well, if 0 is Sunday, 1 would be Monday, 2 would be Tuesday, And if we look to, oh, that's our forecast information. 3 would be Wednesday. We just need some way to convert this 2 and 3 to the days of the week that we want to show up. So to do that, we're going to make a new array, and we're just going to call it days. And in that array, we're going to use Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And based off of this array, we're going to take all of the information that comes out of this day and use it to figure out what index of the days array we should use. Thank you. And just like that, we've got our Tuesday and our Wednesday showing up. Okay, so a couple extra steps here. We still had to peel apart the forecast data, but we got exposure to our date object. Where else did we use date before? Other projects. The blog. What did we use in the blog? We used the date of when the blog post was written, but where else did we use it? We did. And in fact, we used some function to make our date object be converted into a timestamp. A timestamp that, interestingly enough, looked like this DT here. So basically what we're learning is that there are all different ways of representing a date, right? But oftentimes we need to use either a built-in date library or another NPM package that would do that date conversion for us. But we're able to use functions to convert that date into the information we're looking for.
So one thing I kind of ran into was to get a date. I don't know how I can find this date thing, so I started Googling how to convert dates. So I found this, you click on this weird thing where it's like it multiplied the BT number by 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Then it converted that to a multiple page string.
Mm-hmm.
Then I could just pick what weekday you want to, like it automatically converts the weekday from there, but it's shorter.
Yes.
So it just kind of example, there's a lot of ways to do it. Mine looks a lot. That's it. Oh, I cannot believe that. When you said like it day, I was like, no way. Because I was on like Stack Overflow, all these weird forums.
So for many, many years, dates are one of those things that you think computers should be pretty good at handling and just aren't. And so there are all kinds of different issues that you run into with dates of like, hey, this is great, but what happens if I'm out in California? Now all of a sudden I'm off by a couple hours. Now we got to factor in time zones to that. There is a great YouTube video by Tom Scott on why dates are so complicated. And one of them is he starts going into time zones and he goes, all right, so you just add a couple hours or take a couple hours off. And then you hit a time zone where the time zone is off by 2.5 hours. And you're like, okay, now I got to go handle that. And you go a little further into it and then you go, oh, it turns out parts of Arizona don't observe daylight savings time because they're part of a Native American reservation that doesn't agree with daylight savings. So you got to factor all of that in.
My favorite time zone is Tonga time.
Yes.
Plus 12.5 hours.
Yes.
That's it for like you run through all of these tests because they're dates that are tragically hard to figure out.
Yes. And so there are lots of date libraries out there. The most common one for the longest time in JavaScript was called Moment.js. Unfortunately, if you want to talk about open source, this is an open source project that they decided to no longer keep maintaining. So even though you go to NPM and do a search for Moment, you'll find that there are it is for parsing and dealing with dates. It's basically an easier way for us to set a date in and get the information out that we want from it. So even though this has 15 million weekly downloads, no, not all time, not monthly, 15 million downloads a week, it is in maintenance mode. In other words, they don't maintain this anymore because there are other open source libraries out there that do it better. And so the maintainers of this repo still have it available to download because a lot of people's code still relies on Moment. But they say right at the beginning, you should choose a different library because there are better, different options out there. And if you click on a link into their documentation, they've got all different kinds of blog posts about this. But the main thing that they say is that the native date function in JavaScript somewhere in there has gotten so good that there's no reason that you need a library like this, or if you do need something more advanced, more powerful, there are other open source libraries out there that are more actively maintained and taking care of issues like that. Yeah, there are 15 million people still downloading that every week. And so just because it's no longer maintained doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means that when something comes down the line, when a state says we don't do daylight savings time anymore, or a new time zone gets introduced, or a country name changes due to some civil revolution, right? There are all different things that can happen with time zones. Moment is not promising that they will be up to date or continue maintaining this. They're encouraging you to look at either other projects or use the functions that are built in, like getDay, that are native to JavaScript, where you don't have to install anything directly. Yeah, so instead of 33.71, we can come in here, put a mass.round on this, and another built-in JS function, and get our 34 out. We could, yeah. If you didn't want it to round up and you just wanted to drop off the decimal, you can use .floor, and that will just drop the decimal and put that in. With all of that said, when I go over homework, the goal is that you can take what we've done in here and apply it into your own code. And this goes, I've got you guys up virtually as well and can hear you, I think, I hope. Does this, with this said, with this example, do you guys feel like you could try your homework?
Try it. Yeah.
If you guys get stuck at any point, at a different point that I did not cover. Okay. We are going to go on break, be back at 7:25. When we get back, we are going to dive into the blog project. We're going to start building out our homepage and use effect and local storage and all that good stuff. We'll see you guys in 25 minutes. Resume the recording. Share my screen. Okay, I'm going to pull up our previous blog project, which is going to be quicker for me to find on the schedule. That was no, not that one. Week 10, day 3. Okay, so I'm going to week 10. Day, I think it's actually going to be day 4 because we did it in 2 parts. So desktop. My code week 10, day 4. I'm going to open this up. Remember, this is a vanilla JavaScript project, right? This is not in React. So I'm going to use the Go Live button to pop this open. That's going to open up my new tab, and that's going to have everything that was going on here. Little refresher. We pulled in Bootstrap. We have our container in here. Then we wrote a little script to say, go get the posts out of local storage. If those posts are stored, if we have something, then parse it out. Convert the string that comes out of local storage into an array. Otherwise, assume that there are no posts and make an empty array. Then we start with an empty string and we say, hey, let's check the length of posts. If there are no posts in it, our HTML is going to equal this. If there are posts in it, loop over all of the posts, and every time that you find a new post, generate out this HTML, which is going to use the template literal to include the title, the date, and we saw our friend new date there again. This time, instead of using get day, we use the to locale date string. We put the tagline and the date in, and then once we were finished looping through all the pages, we took our generated HTML and put it into our posts. So very similar thing going on our new HTML. This time we made a form. We have our add post function. Our add post function is generating out an object based off of the values from the form. That's going to have to be handled a little bit differently in React. We'll see how we handle that. Then we get the current posts out of local storage. We parse them out if they exist. If they don't, we make a new empty array, just like we did before. We push in our posts. Then we convert our posts array back into a string, set that into local storage, and redirect them to the home page. Do we have any questions on the existing vanilla JavaScript HTML here before we dive into the React version of all of this?
No.
Okay. To the vanilla JS one? Yep, I can do a live share on both. Live stream. And let me pop open a new window, and I'm going to pull open my week 15 day 1. And I'm going to open up my blog project. I'm going to right click on my package.json. I'm going to npm start that up. That opens up where we left off yesterday, I'm sorry, on Thursday, which is our home screen. And then if we click on go to post editor, it takes us to the post editor. We did that by going into the home screen. We have our home. We've got a link. We use a new link type here, right? So we're not using an a tag href. Instead, we're using link and to. That routing is controlled by our app.js. So a lot of setup that we've got to do to get our app.js working. We import 3 different components from React Router DOM. This is what we npm installed. So we've got our browser router, our routes, and our route. These 2 are kind of required in order to get our router set up. Don't ask me why they need both of them. Basically, it's so you can use different types of router. For our uses, browser router is going to be perfect for everything that we need. Then we specify 2 different routes. These routes are what is controlling what components show up based off of what path is in the URL. In other words, when we go to our URL and look at post editor, we see the post editor is the path here. This router is what's connecting whatever is in the path of the browser to the component that we have imported up at the top, which is linking us to the exported component in the file. So in other words, whenever we see post editor with that component, when we are on the post editor page, we will see the post editor here. Okay. Any questions on the reviews before we dive into making our post editor work?
Yeah,
So
just
I'm not actually going to start on the home page because we don't have the ability to add any posts. So instead, I'm going to start on my new post page.
so
Did
we're,
I live share both of them? No, I only live shared one.
we're in week 15, day 1. Is that right?
Jennifer, are you talking and I can't hear you?
Yep.
I guess that's a stupid question if I can't hear you. If you're remote and have a question, drop it in the live stream channel in Slack. I think my speakers are working, but I'm not positive. Vanilla.js, and let me share my React blog in there. Okay,
Max, can you hear me?
I can.
But you couldn't hear Jennifer.
I couldn't.
Okay.
That's weird.
Now I can hear you as well.
You can hear me now?
I can.
Oh, okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that I'm in week 15, day 1.
That's where we're going to be writing our new code, and then we're going to be referencing code from week 10, day 4. Or you can just pull mine up from the vanilla JavaScript live share and use that one instead.
Oh, that's a lot. You are, where are you? Week 10, day 4 is the one you're in right now?
Correct. He confirmed that it is week 10. It's definitely day 4 of something. It's, yes, week 10, day 4.
Oh, that's mine, not yours. Oh.
Okay, so we're going to dive in here. I just want to check something quickly. Nope, my app CSS is empty, so I am good to get started here. I'm going to go over and I've got everything in a div class container over in my source code. So we know when we come over here and we add in our class, we have to use class name because of React, and then we can use our container just like normal. I am going to check to make sure. No, I do not. I'm going to stumble into that in 1 second. So I'm going to come back over here and I've got my form and anything JavaScripty, right? This on submit, I'm going to hold off on doing, but I want the structure to remain the same. So I'm going to take this whole form tag and copy it and then paste it over here. However, I'm going to take off my on submit and I'm going to be careful. Whenever I have a class, I need to change that to a class name. So I'm going to do that in my 3 locations. I'm going to hop back over to my browser and I make sure you're in your React one, not your live share. It should be localhost 3000. And I've got a very ugly post editor here. Well, it's all pretty here and it's all ugly over here. I use the exact same HTML. I changed all my class names over. What is missing over here? Bootstrap. Where do we put Bootstrap? If I go public index HTML up in my head tag, I don't have Bootstrap in here anywhere. So I need to go back to my vanilla JS version. I need to copy this link tag and paste it over into my public index.html. This is the only thing that we should be updating, excuse me, in our index.html, because everything is handled at the app level or below. So if I close out my index.html, I hop back over here. Now on my 3000 on my React port, I have this very pretty form working. I'm going to pause there and poll, make sure everyone has a chance to catch up. Again, at this point, you should have your post editor in your React. Make sure you're on 3000, should be showing your 3 form fields.
Yeah, and I'm not there. Working on it though. Please look at your code again, Max.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions before we roll forward here? Okay. So now we say, all right, we in our vanilla JS, we had this nice little on submit add post. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get that working in our React? So that shouldn't be a problem. We come up to our form, we add an on submit. Now careful, because we're in React, it's going to be a capital S because we camel case everything. And we're going to say on submit add post. Okay, now that we defined our add post, or now that we called our add post, we've got to define it. So I'm going to come up before my return when I'm in the JavaScript portion of my component and say const add post is going to get a new function that gives us access to the event. And just like our vanilla JavaScript where we event prevent default, we also have to prevent default here. Okay, that's nice and all, but I now need to get access to the things that got typed in. What React concept do we use in order to get access to a variable that live refreshes on the screen? State. State is what we have to use to say, hey, whenever there's some live data that the user interacts with, whether they're seeing it, whether they're updating it, whatever it is, we need to put that in state. So React is smart enough to refresh and re-render the screen whenever that data changes. So we got to go up to the top and say import use state from React. Then we're going to have 3 pieces of information in state. So we're going to say const title and set title is going to equal a use state that starts out as an empty string. We're also going to do our tagline and our set tagline. Consistency in casing is going to be a use state as well. And finally, we're going to have our content and our set content. And that is going to be a use state that starts out as an empty string, which I did forget up here. All 3 of them should start out as an empty string. Okay, well, now that we've got that created in state, we've got to hitch it up to each one of the components. So down here, we say, hey, the value of this is going to be the title. That means that we're linking up the title coming from here and using it as the title down here for the value of this input. We also need to not only say that that's the value, we need to say, hey, when this is changed, you're going to get the event of that change, set that into the title from the event target value. Then I know you guys are going to scream bloody murder because I'm going to do it quick. So watch, I'm taking my value and my on change, I'm copying it and I'm pasting it into my input and to my text area. So my input, my second input and my text area all have the value and the on change on them. I'm going to take a break in 1 second, but I want to show you what hilarity ensues if we don't do our copy and paste right. I'm going to come over here and I've got my title, my tagline, and my content, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I come in here, I type in ABC, and I get ABC in all 3 of my inputs. And I'm like, oh, that's not right. Anything I type in one of these is automatically updating the rest. What's going on there? Well, the value for this input I tied to title, but when I copied and pasted, the value down here is still wired up to the title. So I need to change this to tagline and this to set tagline and this to content and this to my set content. So I save there, I come over here, I type in ABC, type 1, 2, 3, I type ABC, and I am all set and good to go. Pausing there to let you guys catch up. If you had an error in your console about controlled and uncontrolled, you can ignore that. We already fixed that in our code. Leaving this up on the screen, keep in mind that this value and on change need to be added to your 2 other ones. Oh, and it would help if I polled you guys so I know where you're at. All right, we good to go? Any questions? Okay. Anyone need one more minute before we keep going?
Max,
Yep.
I have a question.
No problem.
I have a question. Like my local host is 3001, yours is 3000. And mine browser looks different than yours. Like instead of like being vertical, they all are in the same line.
Okay, so make sure the different port doesn't matter. What does matter is in your public index.html, make sure you've got your bootstrap in here.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
And if that doesn't fix it, let me know and you can screen share.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, we good? Anyone need help? Okay. So let's go back to our vanilla JS. So we've got our add post, we got our event prevent default. Now we've got all of this information about the post. Okay, we still want to have that object, but we already have access to the title, the tagline, and the content. So we're going to learn a new a new JavaScript shorthand here. We're still going to make our const post, but instead of pulling in the title, which is the key, and then having to pull the title in from the state and doing the tagline and also having to pull the tagline in from the state, what JavaScript allows us to do is if the title and the value of the title are the same, we can actually just specify it once. So we can say the title, the tagline, and the content are all going to come from whatever value is in state, but the timestamp is going to come from a new date. And hopefully all of that's working. To console log it all out. So I come over here. I've got my AB, my A, and my 1.1 typed in. I click the post button, and now I get my 1.1, my A, my title, and my timestamp all coming out. Again, this is a shorthand to say whatever we type in here will be the key, and then whatever the value of title, tagline, and content is will go in as the value. So I'm going to just leave a note here for shorthand of title : title, i.e. the key is title and the value from state is also called title. Okay, now the good news is once we've done all of that work, all we're doing in local storage is all exactly the same. Local storage does not change at all between React and JavaScript. So I can come over here and I can take this whole thing, come back over to my add post and paste that sucker right in. It's a lot of code that we just took there. On my code, it's line 52 all the way down to 63. The window.location we need to change, but everything else is the same. So the let posts, get it from local storage. If there are stored posts, parse it out. If not, start it as an empty array. Take our post, push it in, then set it all back to local storage. All of that goes in to my add post. Make sure that's going in between the opening curly and the closing curly for add post.
We wanted those things to clear out, just put in like a set state, like that's what I'm sure.
Yeah, we don't need to to do that because we're going to navigate away from the page. So the form field is going to disappear. But if, yes, you wanted to clear out the form field, you would just do a set title to your empty array, or I'm sorry, empty string. And then the same for your set content and all of that stuff, just empty strings in there. Okay, so last step we need to finish up here, and then I'll pull you guys and give you another minute to catch up, is over here, we've got a window.location. It turns out window.anything or document.getAnything is discouraged in React. We don't really want to access the document directly because we want to take advantage of React's virtual DOM, right? Local storage is an exception to that. Local storage, because it isn't any different in React, that you're allowed to use. However, window.location is going to cause some inefficiencies in changing the route. It's inefficient because we're telling the browser to change the URL instead of using the native router that we're using in our app.js. So in order to use this React Router DOM, the more efficient one, what we need to do is come into our post editor and say import use navigate from React Router DOM. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to say const navigate to is equal to our use navigate. We've seen two hooks so far. One is use state, one is use effect. Those are two hooks, two functions that React provides us access to by default. Use navigate is the third hook that we have seen, except it's coming from React Router DOM. It's not built into React itself. Because we've got this navigate function here, we can now come down after our set item and say navigate to quotes with an empty slash. That's going to take us back to the home page. So I'm going to save there. I come over here. I type in A, B, C. I click my post button and boom, I'm back on my home page. Now my home page doesn't have any post showing yet, but if all is working well, that should be in my local storage. So I'm going to pause there. The two steps that we added as we put it or use navigate in, sorry, 3 steps. We added this const navigate to, and then we've got our navigate to down here at the bottom. If all of this is working, it should take you to a home screen, but it will not show you the posts on the home screen yet. Pulling there, making sure you guys all have a minute. Like you guys are still working, so I'll give you another minute before we roll forward here. Remember, when you do get it working, go back, review the code, make sure you understand, you can say in English in a sentence what each line of code is doing.
To clarify this, this shorthand that we post object.
Mhm.
Does that only work with state variables?
No, we'll work with anything. So even if we had something up here, this is just an example, don't follow along. If we say const like animal equals cat, and then we came down here and we said animal is equal to our animal, the output of this will eventually be, you know, we've got our post is equal to an animal cat. This and this are saying the exact same thing. So definitely a shorthand. You see this all the time, especially in older JavaScript code, because this is only a newer feature of JavaScript. But it happens so frequently that they were like, this is very repetitive. We can just tell if it's the name of a variable and a key to use the name of the variable as the key and then set the value to whatever the value is of the variable.
Does the variable have to be like, so for instance, you made that, you know, that one was below, right? But you made it outside of.
It's not,
It was inside the, okay.
it's in post editor, but not in add post. Yeah. So it's not technically global, but it is scoped outside of the add post. Yeah. In general, we don't really like creating any variables outside at the global scope unless it's a component in React, because it has some weird consequences on re-rendering in state. It's like most of you guys are voted in. Anyone need help?
I need help, Max.
Sure. Share screen. Let's take a look.
All right. So I'm trying to play catch up and make everything line up right. And somewhere something went wrong. I might have missed something. Can you see my screen?
I can. So you've got to navigate to. There were 2 steps that we did to make the navigate to work.
So I probably missed one, probably up top somewhere.
Yep. 2 places. Go ahead and give me remote access.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so what we did is we had to tell it where our navigate is coming from. And that is coming from a function called use navigate from our React router DOM.
Okay.
Then in order to actually be able to navigate somewhere, we have to say navigate to is equal to our use navigate function that's coming in from React router DOM. So in other words, we take the React router, we get access to the use navigate. The use navigate we use down here to give us access to the navigate to. And then if we scroll down a little, our navigate to we use right here to take us to the home page. So now if we go to your post editor, we type in AB12 CD and hit the post button, it should take us to the home page. It's not. Now I notice that it refreshed for a split second and it's got all this junk up in the URL. What's happening there is our form on submit, capital S, was not linked to our add post. So because we were missing that capital S, it wasn't actually running all of our good JavaScript code up here. So let me do my A, my B, and my C and hit post. Now it doesn't look like anything worked, but it did take us back to our home page. So you're all caught up and good to go.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember you said there was something that we needed to add in to prevent all of the like the title tagline content from putting in the same thing. What was that again?
You make sure your on submit on your form tag has a capital S.
Okay. Oh, let me just share.
Yeah, so everything looks good up here. Go down to your form And your form has an on.
Smith. There we go.
Nope, now it's got an on submit.
Oh, whoops. Hold on. There we go.
Sorry, I have very little to entertain me, so I just try and enunciate typos.
No, I appreciate it. Let's see.
So now the only thing that you've got is your value and your on change. Are all three of them are using title and set title. You need to change it on the second one to tagline and set tagline, and then on the third one to content and set content.
Okay. So this needs to be set tagline.
No, I'm sorry, the name doesn't matter. The value and the on change are the two important ones. So the value is going to be tagline.
Oh,
And then in 61, it's going to be set tagline. And then the same for 67 is going to become content. And then 69 is set content. There you go. Good to go.
wonderful. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? All right. I'm gonna put a poll up. You don't know. Making an administrative decision. We're gonna stop here because we can get our homepage working, but we've got all day tomorrow set out for the blog. So instead, what I'm going to do, I've got three follow-up things for you. We are going to spend a minute to do terms. However, what we're going to do, I just posted a poll in the CIC students channel about common space memberships. There are a couple options in there. Basically, or if you're interested in either a 24-hour membership or a 9-to-5 membership, and then also if you would only be interested if it were sponsored by Hack Upstate, in other words, free for you guys, or you would be interested in it even if you had to chip in for half of it. So there are a couple poll options in there. I know we polled you guys on this earlier, but to be completely honest, it fell off our radar. And we want to get that working for you guys this week. So anyone who is interested in memberships, the goal is to have all of that set up at Common Space by the end of the week. So please vote in there. You can vote for multiples if for whatever reason you wanted to, but go ahead and vote in there. That will be appreciated. And we definitely want to make sure that we get that money in our budget spent in a way that is helpful for you guys. The other thing is we are going to be posting a new feedback form for guest speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and post that in. This is less helpful for you guys and more helpful for us to know what guest speakers we should have back. That will show up at 8:30 in the CIC Students C4 channel. So that will be in there right at the end of class. You are welcome to fill that out. It is not a requirement, but it's highly encouraged. Mainly thinking about future students and what guest speakers we should have back, and any additional feedback can all be submitted on that form. That will be showing up at 8:30 in Slack. And then final thing we're going to do, pulling up the outline for today, we are going to generate terms like we always do. However, this is not only about terms that we covered tonight, but also any terms that you learned from the guest speaker that you would like to capture. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And remote guys, feel free to tune in as well. What terms did we use that we wanted to capture? use navigate, a function built into, actually, it is a function hook built into React router DOM that allows us to programmatically navigate to another page, commonly used on form submissions. Any other terms? You guys are all in shock that we might get out of class 10 minutes early, that you couldn't come up with any terms. Anything that you learned from Jay's guest speaker presentation?
Could we do open software license?
Sure. Software license. Legalese written to accompany your software about how it may be used. May include details around whether the software can be used commercially, whether payment is required, distribution, and renaming details, etc. So there are some pieces of, accreditation is a good one. There are some pieces of software that say, you're welcome to use this wherever you would like. However, if you use it somewhere on your app, someone has to be able to get the details and show that this app was built with using this piece of software. That is actually very common if you guys have iPhones. A new feature in iOS 16 is if you go into the settings app and open any third-party app, there is a new section for accreditation that I'm blanking on how to get to. So if you go into the settings app on your iPhone and do a search for acknowledgements, you can actually see a long list of everything that app uses, including a bunch of open source or third-party libraries. Acknowledgement or accreditation is one thing that can be in a license. Some people will say you can use our software, but if you make money off of it, you either can't use it or you've got to buy a license from us yearly. Some things are completely open source, but Red Hat's big model is they charge for support, right? So, hey, you can use our operating system whenever, but when shit hits the bed or you need help from us, that's how you can pay us to get expert advice from our software. So software license is definitely a big deal. Fortunately, with NPM, if you're working in a smaller project, most NPM packages are licensed in a way that you can use them commercially. But that's something to certainly consider is if you're building it. Excuse me, if you're building a project that you are getting paid for, whenever you add something new in through NPM, you should definitely check the license and make sure you're not violating anything. Other terms. Governance. I don't want to call it political, but the operations of an open source project that control how contributions and how code contributions are made, along with the details of how members interact. I'm sure there was a much better definition. Let me see if I can Google something Oh, it is political.
Yeah, it's gotten well. The gentleman shared, he's kind of said sometimes it could be political, sometimes it's just social. So I can see where like it's governance, like within a group, there might be an administrator who's like, this is how we do things here and stuff, like they're not gonna be penalized, but there's also like the FCC and stuff like, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm sure they both could technically be governance.
Yeah, so it's you know, part of it is the types of members, contributors may be different than maintainers. There is the political nature of it is someone may open a pull request and then say, hey, I don't, the maintainers of the project could say like, we don't really agree with this feature. We don't think this feature would be helpful to our users. Or they may say, this is all great and the code is all there, but you didn't fill out the pull request form right. So we don't really know what you added, or we don't know what you're trying to accomplish with this. So that all kind of goes into governance of what does it take to make an open source project work under the hood. Other terms.
It's not really a term, Max, but if you're doing a project you're getting paid for, and you have to check licensing, how do you do that?
Give me a second. So, sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
How do you check licensing on a project if you're using something like NPM?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I go to GitHub and I just do a search for React, you will find that 9 times out of 10, they have a file in here called license. And if you open that up, you can see this is the MIT license. And believe it or not, this is the whole license. This is what, 2 paragraphs, a little more than 2 paragraphs. This is the whole MIT license. Now you may say, okay, that's great, but what does this actually mean? There is actually a website called chooselicense.com that shows you what the breakdown of all of this is. So if we go do a search for MIT license, it will show you that you are permitted to use this not only commercially, but you are also allowed to distribute this license. In other words, you are able to put this up on your own server. You are also allowed to modify it, which means if I'm working in some React code and I say, you know what, I don't like this feature of React, or I'm going to add my own feature to React, I can modify that code and not necessarily have to give it back to Facebook. And then private use is also, hey, I work at Tuzag, I use React. React is under the MIT license, but no one else is allowed to use my React code unless they work at Tuzag. So that's what the private use falls under. So then there is some conditions that say a copy of the license and copyright notice must be included with the license material. In other words, the React code that we have at Tuzag has to include the license with it and say, hey, anything that's under any React code that's used here is under the MIT license. And then they have things on limitations as well. So this says there's a liability clause in this. In other words, if my code breaks because something in React changes, I can't go sue Facebook. And then there's a warranty, because warranties in different countries by default have certain protections for the consumer. So if I go to Apple and I buy an iPhone and 2 days later it just spontaneously stops working, I can go back to the Apple store and say, you've got to fix this. Well, the same can be applied to software as well. If I say, hey, Facebook, you gave me this React code and it just stopped working tomorrow, I could go back to Facebook and say, Facebook, please go fix React. Obviously, warranties for software are a little bit vaguer or harder to enforce than warranties for a hardware product. However, they still do apply. And so that's why the MIT license protects the maker of the code, the original maintainers of the code, with liability and warranty limitations or waivers. So most projects will have a license file. They will also, in GitHub's interface in particular, also have a little link over here that says MIT license. And if you click on that, you will go to that license file and get the details about that. This is true for almost any open source software. If I do a search for Node, Node.js, open source, the stars are always a good way of knowing how many people have saved this. You can see 25,000 people have forked this. That means that they have taken Node, copied it into their own repository, and worked on it from there. Oftentimes they do that to make a pull request. There are 402 of them, plus 13,000 issues people are currently having with the Node.js code. But over here, you will notice they have a view license, and they should also have that license file. And if you go ahead and pop that open, Node has a very long license, very, very long license. This is because Node was developed initially. Oh, you know what? There are externally maintained libraries. So in other words, Node uses libraries, other open source libraries, and because those libraries require their license to be included in the Node license, we see all of these different dependencies, and the license are included with them. So for whatever the CJS module Lexer is, that is some dependency of Node, you can see they use the MIT license. So all of the sub-dependencies of Node are included in this license file. Kind of interesting. And the same thing here, if you click on view license, it's going to take you right into that. So if you've got, 4 or 5 free days and love reading the same thing over and over again, check out the Node license. Now, it's something that I joke about, but if you're working on any commercial project, whenever you add a dependency, making sure that the licenses are in line with what you're trying to build is not a waste of time. That is an important step. Did that answer your question, Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you
Cool.
very much. That's a great resource.
So React router DOM, browser router, routes and route. All functions of the React router DOM package that allow us to link components to specific paths from the browser URL. Use parts there instead of the specific functions. Anything else? Nah. So the question was, when you're in React, can you not use anchor tags at all, the ahref? The answer is no, you can still use anchor tags, but you shouldn't. And the reasoning behind that is whenever there is an anchor tag, the browser takes care of the navigation. So before I answer that, does anyone have any other terms to capture so I can let some of you guys go if you're already on overload? I will give you the answer. It's just a 3-minute answer. Okay. If that's the case, have a great night. I will see you guys tomorrow. I will be here in person. Thursday is the really important day. If you can be in person, please try and make it on Thursday. We will have a site visit from the Alliance of Economic Inclusion. Those are the guys that are quite literally paying me to teach you guys. So they are the reason why the course is free. If you can make it Thursday, please do. Otherwise, if you want to stick around and hear the answer of why you shouldn't use A tags in React, you're welcome to, or you can totally peace out. So the answer of why you shouldn't use A tags is basically what happens when you load up localhost 3000 or any React app. What happens is the browser sees index.html, it sees the empty div tag called root, and it downloads all the JavaScript that React has in it, including your components, your content, your CSS, everything. When that loads into the browser, React is now in charge of everything that shows up on the screen. And so that's going to look at the URL in the browser, that's going to find the component and show that component. Now, when you want to go to a different component, the way it works with a link tag, not the anchor tag, is that React says, hey, you clicked on that link, you now need to go to this path, which is going to take you to another component. However, because all of your content is already downloaded into that JavaScript file, it's actually more efficient for React to remove whatever page you were on and to put the new component in than it is to go to that other page and reload all of that content. So that's what the anchor tag is going to do. The anchor tag is like built into the browser. React can't override that. And so when you click on that, it will take you to that right path, but it's got to reload the whole React app. When you use the link tag, you're basically empowering the React router DOM to remove one component and put the other component in, which is much more efficient. And so the anchor tags will still work. You'll only notice a slight delay on an anchor compared to a link. But as your application grows, the more and more content it's got to load on the initial download, and that's why it's more efficient to use the link. Sorry, that's a long answer that I can't really.
That's good, because there's a lot of anchor tags in my screen, and if I switch everything to React, there's so many anchor tags.
Yes, it's still going to work, but you will actually feel the difference between it. If you click on one of the anchor tags, you'll get like a white screen for a second, and then the whole page will load, which is kind of what you expect out of a website. But if you're on Facebook.com and you click on something else, you'll notice the nav bar stays in place and the header stays in place and all of this stuff of like, oh, this is just making another API call, but I don't feel like I'm going to a completely new page and reloading it. It's because Facebook is using React, it's using the link tags instead of the anchor tags.
No mistaken, that's kind of like one of the things cause of React is it only updates what exactly what is.
Yes. Brian said, if you guys can't hear remotely, one of the main draws of React is that it only reacts to the data that has changed. In other words, it's not re-updating the entire page. It's only updating the content that has changed. That is all because of React's virtual DOM, DOM, document object model. In other words, React takes that over from the browser, and because of that, it can do it more efficiently. Can you tell that this is the half of class that I prefer to teach, because I could talk about this stuff for hours.
Well, thanks for the explanation, Max. Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you guys tomorrow.